Trudeau sucks. I didn't want to be a Trudeau sucks channel, but here's the fact of the matter. The guy's a dweeb. He's destroying Canada. He's hurting Canadian pocketbooks. He's just trying to buy his way back in the polls. He's doing everything that he can, it seems like, to destroy Canada on his way out because we all know he's going to get voted out in the next election. Canadians are tired. They're struggling. They're at the grocery store looking for sales and discounted products that are about to go bad just so that they can afford to eat because of Trudeau's policies and everything that he's doing with his ministers and the cabinet, which brings me into what my first video is going to be. We're talking about Canadians at the grocery store, how they're struggling. We have another video talking about how Trudeau is trying to buy himself in the polls, how it's not working because Canadians are sick of it. We have some rate predictions at the end of the video for what's going on with the Canadian real estate market, how Trudeau's policies are impacting what the Bank of Canada can do, because believe it or not, the Bank of Canada is in trouble because of Trudeau as well. Canadians are, the Bank of Canada is struggling. Let's get into today's videos. We have some really exciting stuff. I do think the rate talk in the last video is important, but let's dive into it.
Now we are learning through a new report, a growing number of Canadians are consuming food that should be discarded because they can't afford to waste it. Sylvain Charlebois is the author of that report and the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. What more can you tell us, Sylvain? Thanks for joining us about your findings here.
Well, so many months ago, we were getting calls about people risking at home eating food that may not be safe. And so we were wondering whether or not this is a national phenomena. Due to higher food prices, are people actually taking on more risks at home while cooking? And when you're preparing food, if you can't afford food and you can't afford to waste food, maybe some people are actually taking on some risk. And based on...
Think about that. We are in Canada. We should be one of the most prosperous nations in the world. And we have Canadians, thanks to Trudeau, thanks to the carbon tax, you know, and the grocery stores are not innocent here, but thanks to his policies, it's led to Canadians eating expired food, risking getting sick. And I mean, listen, there's ways, a best by date is one single thing, but you know, you can smell, you can do other stuff to make sure that the food's okay. But the fact of the matter is, we are in a position where Canadians are taking risks to eat food because they can't afford to buy groceries, and it's crazy.
On the evidence that we have now, it seems as though a lot of people are taking on more risks. About 1 Canadian 5 actually have fallen ill. They believe to have fallen ill due to the fact that they ate a product that was actually expiring or was actually close to its best before date.
And were you able to assess at all if people were consciously making that decision or even possibly had been ill and yet were sort of continuing to eat this way just because of some of the concerns about cost?
Basically, based on the results, a lot of people felt that, well, they weren't sure. They weren't sure whether or not a product was safe, but they actually ate it anyways. But of course, as you know, John, if you do eat an unsafe product and you do get sick, it would cost you probably more than wasting that food, because you'll probably miss work and you'll miss a couple of paychecks on top of that.
Yeah.
Think about that. Canadians are taking the risk to eat unsafe food, even at the expense of them going to work, because they are worried about grocery prices. And I do agree, if you get sick and you miss a day of work, you know, that's going to cost way more than an $8 pound of ground beef. But the fact is, you know, the Canadians are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And again, the carbon tax, we know how much that is increasing the cost of production and how much that costs extra for us to get food to the grocery stores. Remove the carbon tax, axe the tax, Justin.
Well, let me ask you this question then. At the end of the day, did you get a sense that people are doing this just because of the costs associated with food?
Well, they are actually looking at food, of course, as a necessity. What we're finding out, and we're looking at Statistics Canada's data that was released last week, actually, we're realizing that people are spending more of their household disposable income on food than last year. And so the pressure is clearly there.
You know, people always talk about housing costs because they are getting crazy. And it's like, you know, that obviously is a big indicator for what people are spending their money on. But when the food costs keep skyrocketing, like I'm a single guy, ladies. So if you know, you'd think that my groceries are relatively inexpensive, but every week I go, they're so much higher. And it's like, you know, so I'm a real estate agent. Reach out to me in the link below if you have any questions, you want to work with me in Ontario or anybody in my team across Canada. But, you know, we have all these questions and I get to see the numbers, how prices are happening. And a lot of that has to do with rates, not just the price of the house, which we're going to get into later in this video. But it's like, for me, the absolute necessity is making sure your kids are fed. And of course, housed as well. But it's like food is such a big one that needs to be more pressure on that. And we could be more globally competitive when it comes to food if we got rid of that stupid carbon tax.
And on top of that, people are very careful in terms of how they spend their money on food at the grocery store. So when they come home, they see food very differently than just a few years ago. They see it as an asset, making sure that they can actually use it optimally as much as possible.
So there's a lot of thinking at the end of the day, it sounds like, whether it's what people end up buying or how long they're willing to sit with something that maybe has a best before date because of the food price reality. Did you notice any trends among population, like age groups of Canadians?
That was probably the most alarming part of our survey. Gen Zs and millennials, we've seen more of that group getting sick due to the fact that they actually risk more. And to a certain extent, John, it makes sense a little because millennials are in their economic prime, so they are spending a lot, and they are really the one group that has actually been impacted the most by inflation right now and higher interest rates. So I'm not overly surprised to see that happen because of what's going on with food inflation. But the bottom line, John, is this. I think our relationship with food has changed, and therefore the way that people assess risks at home has also changed as well. I think grocers are actually adapting to a different market, a more frugal market, of course. You're seeing more private labels out there. It's a trading down market, let's face it. And of course, with food service, you're seeing many grocers offering more ready-to-eat products. I'm not surprised to see that. So, and that's going to continue for a while. So
more ready-to-eat products that are, you know, of course, wildly expensive. I don't know if you guys have seen the food trays. Like, we do know that these grocers are doing everything they can to protect their profits. Shrinkflation's real. The video's not about the shrinkflation. It's about how Canadians are struggling due to food costs because of stinky Trudeau. So next video is, speaking of which, we're going to be getting into the polls, what's happening with Trudeau, because he's doing everything he can to just cling on to this last little bit of power that he has. We know he's gone. We hope that he's gone. So it's like, let's get into what they have to say and why it's not working. You know, we know Canadians are fed up. Let's dive into it.
I've never seen a circumstance in which this government has been rated so high on never vote for. It shows you that it's just a solid wall of public disapproval that they're facing, and it makes it incredibly hard to see how they can recover from where they are.
So 27%
It's possible Trudeau goes down as the least liked Canadian of all time.
of people, meanwhile, said they would never vote Conservative. The NDP and Bloc Québécois trail behind that at 14% and 5% respectively. Conservatives currently have a 19%.
For those not willing to vote Conservative who are watching this video, you know, it's just diet liberal for Conservatives in Canada. They're extremely liberal. They're just not Trudeau. Please vote for them to get Trudeau. I can't look at his face anymore.
18-point lead over the Liberals, who remain no better than second in every region. Daryl Bricker from Ipsos joins me now with all the details of their latest poll. Daryl, we appreciate this, so break it down for us. What do people feel of the federal budget?
Not much. In fact, we asked people, we said, do you give it a symbolic 2 thumbs up, a symbolic 2 thumbs down, or do you just shrug your shoulders? 17% said 2 thumbs up. 43%, actually 40% said 2 thumbs down, and 43% just said, I'm shrugging my shoulders. And then we asked them another question, which was, do you think this is going to help you or hurt you? And the percentage saying it was going to help them was about 10%. The percentage that said it was going to actually hurt them was 37, so almost 4 to 1. So if the goal of the budget was to really give Canadians a very positive assessment about what the next 18 months is going to be like under administration, the Liberal administration, it doesn't seem to be working at the moment.
Because they know the spending is not going to help. They just know. First of all, nobody trusts him because he never does what he says he's going to do. And then, of course, the spending is not going to help. The spending is what's causing the problems. And it's not helping Canadians. And a lot of these young Canadians who are part of this fairness budget know we're going to be paying for that in the future.
So you're looking at this. This was basically touted as an affordable living budget in many ways. Talked about housing, for example. But you're looking at only 17% approved it. A lot of people thought going into this, the Liberals, because you saw the numbers going into basically their polling numbers, they kind of needed a Hail Mary, didn't they? And it didn't even seem like, forget someone catching it in the end zone. It didn't even seem like they got out of the pocket and maybe the quarterback was sacked on this one. What's your impression?
And fumbled the ball. And there's only 2 minutes left on the clock. This did not reverse things to the extent that the Liberals wanted them to. In fact, what it probably did was reinforce the sentiments that were already there, which is 75% of Canadians, at least in this poll, saying that it's now time for a change.
Was there any difference?
Time for a change. Trudeau, go now. You don't understand how much, him sticking around for this next 18 months is so detrimental because he's doing so much more damage. It's not giving us time to be able to turn around some of these other things that could be improving. Ugh!
You see a lot of the provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, not necessarily supportive of the Liberal government right now. But was there any change that maybe you were surprised by those polling numbers? Maybe demographically, regionally?
It is so consistent over every region, across every demographic group. There's it's slightly better among younger Canadians, but still 2 to 1, not good.
Younger Canadians,
I think
stop.
The biggest change that's happened in all of this was on the question of leadership. We now see Pierre Poilievre at 48% in terms of best prime minister, compared to 23% for Justin Trudeau, and
That's great to hear. Like I said in my last video, we need to make sure that we hold Pierre accountable. We need to make sure that he is responsible if he's going to be the ones taking the reins. That's the guy we are going to be trusting. Remember, we got to pay attention to what he says. So far, he's saying some okay things, but we got to remember.
the first time we've ever seen that. So all of the things moving against the government reinforced by what happened over the space of the last few days. So if the budget was an opportunity to change the direction of things, what it really did was reinforce people's views that they want a change in government, and that they see the most likely change or the most appropriate change as being the Conservatives at the moment.
You've covered polling numbers for quite some time, not to age you, of course, but have you ever seen numbers like these?
Yeah, Brian Mulroney in the early 1990s. When he came out of the GST and Meech Lake and all the other things that they dealt with around the Constitution, the public just said, thanks, but no thanks. We're ready to move on. And you saw Mulroney's numbers drop, actually even lower than this. So yeah, very much in this direction. And the other part is that, Anthony, is it's not like something new has just happened. This has been locked in for almost a year now. Nothing that the government is doing is changing the direction of what Canadians think about how they want to vote in the next election. And as a result, what's happening is they're running out of options, and at some point they're going to be running out of racetrack.
Listen, he had 9 years to figure it out. He had 9 years to get Canadians on his side, and all he did was make everybody's life worse, more people angry, and especially when it comes to housing, when it comes to interest rates, how people are struggling with debt right now. A lot of that is due to Trudeau's spending, which we talk about in this next clip that I'm going to show. We're going into some rate announcements, some rate predictions for what's going to happen with the real estate market, because this is huge because, the Canadian real estate market is kind of not doing that well right now. So these predictions could lead to what's going to be happening next. Let's dive into the next video.
Let's bring in Rabobank strategist Christian Lawrence. Christian, great as always to have you with us. I went through a laundry list of considerations for investors right now. Is there one at the top of your list?
Thanks for having me, John. It's great to be here. I mean, I think interest rates are absolutely critical, as is volatility. Volatility has really been a key transmission mechanism around the geopolitical noise that we've been seeing. Because believe it or not, just a couple of weeks ago, we were at pre-Russia Ukraine lows when it comes to energy volatility. We were at a subdued levels with equity volatility, FX volatility close to the lows, and even interest rate volatility was back to pre-hike levels. So we're really at this strange juncture, and I think that is feeding through into a lot of market price action at the moment. But
And I think a lot of Canadians actually feel that way too. They're kind of every time I get a conversation with people, it's always like we're in this like what's next, like what's going to happen next, and it's this weird spot that we're in, and we need to know what's going to happen with rate cuts, which he does get into. So,
but of course, it really is inflation and interest rates that are the key trigger here.
Yeah, and what do you think the general issue on that one is? The fact that we've had to reassess ultimately what the U.S. central bank is going to do on rate policy this year?
Exactly. I mean, at the beginning of the year, at one point, there was over 100 basis points of cuts being priced into the US and something similar in Canada. And now, if you look at the US, it's less than 50 basis points priced by the end of the year, a little more in Canada at 60 basis points. And I think that pricing is pretty reasonable. We do expect the Bank of Canada to start cutting rates this summer, but for the Fed, we expect them to really wait until September before the first move.
And the big reason is government spending. The last time the Fed met, they were like, they can't say this officially, but they were like, hey, Trudeau government, if you keep spending money, it makes our job harder. We can't lower rates, and Canadians are suffering because what happens is they need to see these numbers switch. Trudeau's spending, which he always says is like benefits, we're helping Canadians, blah, blah, blah. You're hurting Canadians in the medium term, potentially the long term, especially with all the spending. So it's like, stop being crazy, stop spending, and then we can get to these cuts sooner, which we need to see.
And I think the key message here is it's not an aggressive easing cycle. It's more about adjusting rates because the inflation dragon has not been slain. And there's some clear arguments for some more upside when it comes to supply side driven inflation over the coming months.
And that's certainly something to watch when it comes to, let's say, the Canadian dollar. We've been talking recently about how there's still a lot of near-term buzz on rate cuts in Canada, as you alluded to, versus a pushback of that conversation in the U.S. And so the loonie has steadily been losing ground against the U.S. dollar. I guess that wouldn't surprise you.
It is worth noting, when it comes to free-floating currencies, the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar is actually the lowest volatility exchange rate in the world at the moment. And historically, we tend to see the Canadian dollar being driven by interest rate differentials and oil prices. But that relationship to oil has fundamentally changed over recent years. And now we really need to see a very large.
Yeah, again, what happened in recent years? What happened with our oil? Like Trudeau has been crushing oil and gas. You guys should really look up the Norway Sovereign Fund and what they do with their natural gas and their oil reserves. They're able to take care of all Canadians because they encourage a resource-based economy. It's wild what they do. It's actually really interesting. We're not going to get into it today. I might talk about it later. But the fact is they're doing things correctly. Trudeau is crushing innovation. He's crushing our oil and it's making our dollar weaker. But then here's the other problem. Because Trudeau keeps spending and we might have to cut without inflation falling and then ahead of the Fed in America, that could make our dollar lower, like he's saying. And if our dollar's lower, we start to import inflation and then Trudeau's going to be spending even more and it's going to turn into a whole thing.
Very sharp move in oil for that to really filter through into Canadian dollar strength. So for now, I think it's really going to be all about interest rate differentials. If we assume that the worst case scenarios don't emerge and we don't see oil start jumping up into the 3-figure territory.
So as he said, I do think that the interest rate cuts, the earliest we're going to see it is summer. I wouldn't even be surprised if we missed a summer cut. That's the earliest we're going to see it though, obviously. If we wait until September, we wait until the Fed, that would also make sense. But I am a real estate agent in Ontario. If you want to work with me, click in the link below. We can set up a meeting. Or if you want to work with anybody in my network all the way across Canada, we can handpick somebody for your area. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and have a great rest of your day.